Welcome, students. This will be a continuation of the reading of the essay. We had read this particular paragraph that you can see on your screen, but I'll just begin with this so that we can have a quick revision of catch up to what we have already studied. Because Sartre over here makes a very novel and an important claim that writing is an appeal. That is the basic, one of the fundamental ideas that he wants to represent or establish in this essay. That writing is an appeal, writing is an act of generosity, writing, the collaboration of the reader and the writer, it gives value to a text, to a book. These are some of the fundamental points that he establishes in the essay, one of them being that writing is an appeal. So what does he say over here? Just a quick revision. Since the creation can find its fulfillment only in reading, since the artist must entrust to another the job of carrying out what he has begun. This job of carrying out what he has begun is basically that is the point that he, the reader's job. The fact that Sartre is saying that, it is only through to another the job of carrying out what he has begun. Since it is only through the consciousness of the reader that he can regard himself as essential to his work, because already earlier he has established regarding this, he has already established over earlier in the essay that the artist is, whenever the artist tries to make himself essential, the work escapes him. The artist's essentiality opposes the essentiality of the created object. Maybe a painting, maybe a piece of writing. It opposes the essentiality of the created object. Both of them cannot represent essentiality simultaneously. So he has already mentioned that whenever the artist tries to make himself the essential object, the significant object over here, something that represents essence of his consciousness, if the artist tries to make himself or herself the essential, if he or she tries to establish his or her own essentiality, then the work of art, what he has created, that shall escape him or her. The work of art will lose his essentiality. But the artist Sartre has already said that the artist begins an act of revelation of the world. That is his conscious perception of the world, that is represented through language in a work of art. That language may be pictorial, that language may be verbal, that not verbal, it may be written, pictorial or written. So it is the consciousness that he represents through language in the work created. So of course it is the created object that is more essential, because that is what represents a particular facet of the artist's consciousness. The artist can never say that this work of art has everything that I believe in. This work of painting has the culmination, has the manifestation of all of my consciousness, because the artist is an entity in growth. Even the artist grows, like Eliot was talking about in his to criticize the critic, that after a few years he might look back in retrospect in a piece of work and may want to disown it completely, because that may no longer represent his facet of his consciousness, the consciousness that has developed through years. So of course it is the work of art that is the point of essence over here. And so Sartre says that it is only through the consciousness of the reader that he can regard himself as essential to the work. The reader has to come into the equation in order to make himself, to make the artist, the writer, essential. And therefore, Sartre says that all literary work is therefore an appeal. To write is to make an appeal to the reader. It is a request, it is an appeal to the reader. It is the appeal to the reader to make the creator essential. Appeal to the reader that he lead into objective existence the revelation which I, the creator, the writer, have undertaken by means of language. This objectivity is very much necessary. Why is it necessary? Sartre answers that with another question. He says that what should he appeal to? This is the answer to the question. He says that what should he appeal to? The answer is simple. As a sufficient reason for the appearance of the aesthetic object is never found either in the book, we find mere solicitations or endeavors to produce the object. We never find the real aesthetic object in a particular book, because as I said, the artist is also a growing subject, as we all are, all of us are. We are never what we are today. We are never tomorrow what we are today. We grow every day, every moment of our existence. So the artist's culmination of consciousness, the culmination of the revelations that he wants to make, can never be manifested in one single isolated instance of a work. It can never happen. And what the artist reveals has to be brought into reality, into objective reality, through the reader's act of reading. And so he says that the sufficient reason, cause of an aesthetic object. Why is this aesthetic object present over here? The aesthetic object, as I said, it may be both the things, the idea of beauty, that is the writer conceiving something as beautiful. Why does he consider something as beautiful? This reason is not completely facilitated within a work of art. The cause of why the artist, the creator, thinks this to be particularly beautiful, that entire cause is never revealed. The artist merely tries to, because it is his subjectivity, right? So when I read a book, I may not adhere to the artist's or the writer's own idea of beauty, but the creator, the writer, has tried to establish why does he think this object to be beautiful. An aesthetic object is also the principles of writing which an artist chooses for himself or herself, the principle of artistic creation, various principles that he follows, his own subjective learnings becoming principles of decision, again in accordance with Sartre's own philosophy of principles of decision. So it is only the cause, it is only the endeavors the artist tries to establish an aesthetic object. It is not a finished object that he presents, because it is the reader who reads, the reader who interprets. So reader's own subjectivity also comes into question. What the reader thinks about the way the writer writes, what the reader thinks about this particular girl whom the writer might have described as beautiful, like Joyce does, in Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, in one of his epiphanic moments, one of the very few, one of the most beautiful episodes in any literary endeavor, the way that Joyce describes the beauty of the woman with a leg lifted off of the sea level. So that is one of his epiphanic moments. But you and I, we may not think like the writer. That is something that will differ. It is a heterogeneous phenomenon, and Sartre knows that. That is why he says that there is never a sufficient reason for the appearance of the aesthetic object is never found either in the book, where we find mere solicitations or endeavors to produce the object, or in the author's mind and as his subjectivity, which he cannot get away from, cannot give a reason for the act of leading into objectivity, because these two are very opposites to each other. The subjectivity is of the authors, and the objectivity is of the readers. These can never be reconciled. There are 1,000 different ways in which both of these two things can differ. what the artist thinks and what the writer thinks and what the reader perceives. That is how interpretations occur. That is how years later Lion King has been interpreted as an adaptation of Hamlet, because it is how readers through ages have perceived the book. The culture has come to a reconciliation that yes, this particular film, animated film, is very much like the subject matter of Shakespeare's Hamlet. So that is why he says that the author's mind, his subjectivity, which the author can never get away with. আমি আমার ব্যক্তিত্ব ছাড়া তো কিছু লিখতে পারবো না, কিন্তু ওই ব্যক্তিত্বটা is not important when it comes to how you, the reader, perceive a piece of work. ওই যেটা অনেক দিন আগে নিউ ক্রিটিক্সরা আর কি বলে গেছে, বা যখন স্ট্রাকচারালিজম শুরু হচ্ছে, সবে শুরু হচ্ছে, they are saying the intention of the author, the subjectivity of the author, why is he writing, that is both unknowable and undesirable. You cannot know it, the reader cannot know it, because it is inside of the consciousness of the writer's mind, which is of course not knowable. The writer can never get away with it. If you ask the writer that what is this book about, he will give you his own formed philosophies, his own forms of writing, his own principles that he has developed as an individual, as a subject. And undesirable, because if you work according to the intention of the author, if a reader reads the book in accordance to the intention of why the writer has written this, regarding the background, the biographical context of the writer, the reader can never manifest his or her own consciousness into the book. The reader can never source out his or her freedom of interpretation, freedom of reading, freedom of perceiving the world that a particular book produces. And that is why Sartre says that the subjectivity cannot give reason for the act of leading into objectivity. The appearance of a work of art is a new event which cannot be explained by anterior data, that is by givens. The givens, the background of the author, the intention of the author, the subjectivity of the author, they are not enough reasons for you to take up a book and read it. আজকে একটা অথর নিজের দেশে আমরা গ্যাব্রিয়েল গার্সিয়া মার্কেস পড়ি. Why do we read it? Why do people all over the world love to read Marquez? Why? Is it because he brought a sort of a revolution, in context of the, Colombian political atmosphere at that point of time? Is it because he interpreted the constantly violent conflict that was carried out in Colombia or Latin America, and he interpreted them into magical realism? All of these information, his political affinities, his friendship with Fidel Castro, him getting into fist fights outside of a bar, being a Nobel laureate, these are not what appeals us to pick up his book and write. It is the very popularity of the book itself. Marquez, of course, প্রচন্ড বেশি popular একজন writer. So we pick up a book out of my interest, out of our own interest to read the book. Only after we have finished reading the book, only after we have exercised our freedom of perceiving the world of the book, can I go back to the biographical readings of the writer. They may supplement my understanding. ওই Derridian supplement, এই supplement কথাটা বলছি, এটা পড়বে. What is a supplement? Derrida talks about supplement. What is the supplement according to Derrida? Read it and you will understand. Just a Wikipedia study, you will understand what I am saying, why I am saying this. That the biographical knowledge of a writer, the intention of the writer, understanding the subjectivity of the writer, they supplement my reading, but they are not essential to my reading. They may add on an extra facet to my reading, but they cannot be the cause of my reading. Otherwise, the reading will never be a new event. Otherwise, Hamlet wouldn't have been read for 450 years. Otherwise, even Sartre's work would not have been read today. যদি খালি ওর ব্যক্তিত্বটাকে নিয়েই আমি কনসার্নড হতাম, readers would have been concerned. And since this directed creation, which he has already explained before in the text, and we have read that, is an absolute beginning, that is a novel, a new beginning. Every time a different reader as a different subject picks up a book and reads a story, reads an essay. Since it is an absolute beginning, it is therefore brought about by the freedom of the reader and by what is purest in that freedom. Thus, the writer appeals to the reader's freedom to collaborate in the production of art. Beautifully justified. So, appeal kathata, I guess it is understood. So, we will do a critical analysis. I will do some short. We will read critically, analytically read the essay in short points in the last class, or maybe I'll give you an extra class for that. But whatever Sartre says over here is self-explanatory. We do not need an external source in order to prove his point. Sartre explains what he says. Moving on. It will doubtless be said that all tools address themselves to our freedom, since they are the instruments of a possible action, and that the work of art is not unique in that. So all tools, like a hammer, like a bulldozer, they are all tools, and they address themselves to our freedom. How do we use it? It is up to us. And the work of art is not different from that. And it is true that the tool is the congealed outline of an operation. Congealed outline of an operation. Congeal meaning to make solid, to solidify, to make something rigid. So he's saying that it is true that the tool is the congealed outline of an operation. That is, if I have to nail in something into a wall, that operation is solidified with the tool of a hammer. The tool is unique and rigid, and it can do nothing else rather than hammer something into something. That is the purpose. So that is what he's saying, that it is true that the tool is the congealed outline of an operation. But it remains on the level of hypothetical imperative. Hypothetical imperative. It is not the need, your necessity to use the tool. It is hypothetical. It is not concretized. It is just an outline. I may use a hammer to nail up a case or to hit my neighbor over the head. True. So it is congealed, it is rigid, but it is also hypothetical. Insofar as I consider it in itself, it is not an appeal to my freedom. It does not put me face to face with it. Rather, it aims at using it by substituting a set of succession of traditional procedures for the free invention of means. So what is he saying? It's very simple, just a bit written in a complex sentence. So he's saying that I can use a hammer to put a nail on a coffin, or to hit the neighbor over his head, hit my neighbor over the head. Insofar as I consider in itself, that is, the hammer in itself is not an appeal to my freedom. What is the tool then? It aims at using it as a substitution. That is, the hammer is a substitution of a succession of traditional procedures for the free invention of means. So I could have hit the nail, before the hammer was invented. I could have hit the nail with something else. I could have hit my neighbor over the head with something else. So traditional procedures, means, that is means to an end, আমরা বলি না, মানে পদ্ধতি থেকে আমরা কি করতে পারি, means to an end. So the hammer is a substitution of modern means of nailing something, of breaking someone's head. It is a substitution. It substitutes the traditional procedures, traditional tools. And the hammer is an example of how new means are invented, new procedures to reach an end are invented. The book does not serve my freedom, it requires it. So the book, it is a tool like the hammer, but there is a difference. The book does not serve my freedom, it requires the freedom. The hammer does not does not lie in necessity of your freedom, but the book does. Indeed, one cannot address oneself to freedom as such by means of constraint, fascination, or entreaties. There is only one way of attaining it. First, by recognizing it, then having confidence in it, finally requiring of it an act in its own name, that is the name of the confidence that one brings to it. So he says that my freedom is not addressed to, जो freedom নিয়ে বারবার বলছে, my freedom is not addressed to. The book requires the book exists so that it can exist. It requires the freedom of the reader, because I as a reader cannot address to my freedom by constraining my freedom, by being just fascinated by it, or by asking for it. He says entities. That does not constitute freedom. There is confidence. There is only one way of attaining it. And step by step, first you have to recognize that you have a freedom. You have to have confidence in it. And that freedom requires an act. It should be exercised. An act in its own name, in the name of the confidence that one brings to it. The freedom must be exercised. Thus, the book is not like a tool, a means for any end whatever. Right? Like a hammer has multiple ends. Hammer is not just used for nailing. I can murder someone with it. I can even use the end side of the hammer as a hammer. So I necessarily need not use the iron part of it. The hammer is also a claw. It is one part of it is oftentimes a claw with which you can pull out a nail. So the book is not like a tool, means of any end whatever. The end to which it offers itself is the reader's freedom. And the Kantian expression, finality without end, seems to me quite inappropriate for designating the work of art. Now this is something, again, a Kantian concept brought up by Sartre. We will discuss that in details later on, but Sartre himself explains what it means. So he says, Kant had described in his Critique of Reason, he talks about aesthetic objects, and he says that a work of art expresses finality without end. What is this finality of end according to Sartre? It may be a bit different when I explain to you in what context Kant is saying, or what Enlightenment scholars or scholars of Kant are saying. They have interpreted it variously. But Sartre, what does Sartre think of this expression? According to Sartre, it implies that the aesthetic object presents only the appearance of a finality. And is limited to soliciting the free and ordered play of the imagination. So the work of art can only provide you with an appearance of a finality, with a final conclusion, with a semblance of final conclusion, not concrete final conclusion. And it is limited to only soliciting, that is, it can only try to appeal to your freedom. It can only try to, it can only endeavor to create various interpretations of the imagination. It can only try to do so, but it can never do so. That is why finality without an end, a semblance of finality, but without an end, because it can only try to make multiple interpretations. It is not solidified according to Kant. This sort of an expression forgets, Sartre says, this sort of an description of a work of art forgets that the imagination of the spectator, that is the reader or the spectator of a painting, has not only a regulating function but a constitutive one. It does not play. It is called upon to recompose the beautiful object beyond the traces left by the artist. Now this is, এবার তোমাদের মানে ট্রেস কথাটা আর কি, this is a difficult concept. কোথায় গেল এই traces. Sorry. again a Derridean concept. Derridean concept, and Derrida has spoken vastly about it. Writing, it implies writing. Suswecha, meaning writing under erasure. For example, I will explain it in details later on. Not in very much detail, karon Derrida ke niye we cannot discuss. Cannot in the sense it has to be an assignment. Otherwise, I will not be beginning with Derrida in any which way possible. So, just to explain, suppose I am writing this word history. Derrida will say that every form of writing should be under erasure, is under erasure, right? Rather, when we try to, what does this particular expression means? Written expression means that the writer may have written this word history, but when I read it, I must read it under erasure, as in, I must pay attention to everything that the writer has not written down. So reading under erasure, or even writing under erasure, a huge responsibility of the writer, that you leave traces by not writing certain things. Therefore, that is again an appealing to the freedom of the reader. Now, the reader must accomplish, the reader must acknowledge whatever the writer has left out from writing. It is both writing under erasure, that is assume করা কথাটা খুব ভুল হবে. All writing is writing under erasure if we read it critically. If we read it closely, that was the very object of the entire movement, which preceding Derrida, and again Derrida concretized this particular movement, that you need to read closely so that you can read under erasure what the writer has written under erasure. A propagandist writer, a writer of the power, will write history and leave out deliberately certain objects of the history which he or she does not see fit to be historical. Maybe a narrative of the Dalits, maybe the narrative of the refugees, partition literature, which a historian of the power, which a propagandist historian will always try to suppress. The partition was an exceptional case, he or she will say, but that exceptional case, which has created an entire generational history of violence, it needs to be concretized, it needs to be written. That is the writer's responsibility, which Sartre talks about commitment. The writer should be committed to certain thing. The commitment is the essence of the writer. So there will be various historians, maybe partition historians, specifically writing about what has been erased from prominent histories hitherto. And as a reader, when you read that propagandist history, you will also read under erasure. You will assume that there are several points, that there are several instances, several discourses and ideologies that this historian has deliberately forgotten, has deliberately not included in the history book which thousands and thousands of children and people are reading, therefore creating a mishistory, therefore creating a wrong history for the future generation as well. So that is again the freedom of the writer. So here, this is just a very simplistic understanding of what Derrida means by traces. If you want to know about it, if you want to learn about it, read the introduction of grammatology. Of grammatology. Introduction ta, I should warn you, it's written by Spivak. It's not very easy. Of grammatology, of course, you know, it's Derrida's work, seminal work where he creates the fundamentals of deconstruction. Traces being a very important part of deconstructing words. As I just explained, you can just connect the dots. So Sartre says It does not play, that is the freedom of the reader is not, it does not play, it is called upon to recompose the beautiful object beyond the traces left by the artist. The imagination cannot reveal in itself, the imagination cannot reveal in itself any more than can the other functions of the mind. So Kant lays a lot of responsibility upon the imagination. Sartre says that the imagination cannot reveal itself in itself any more than the other functions of the mind. There are other functions of the mind as well. It is always on the outside, always engaged in an enterprise. There would be finality without end if some object offered such a well-arranged composition that it would lead us to suppose that it has an end, even though we cannot ascribe one to it. So Kant's expression, finality without an end, it actually does away with all possibility of traces. And so Sartre says that in order for that expression to be true, a work of art or an object offered to us should be such beautiful, so concretely composed and arranged that it would lead us to suppose that it has a finality, even though we cannot ascribe one to it. By defining the beautiful in this way, Kant describes the aesthetic in this way, one can, and this is Kant's aim, he says, liken the beauty of art to natural beauty. Since a flower, for example, presents so much symmetry, such harmonious colors, and such regular curves that one is immediately tempted to seek a finalist explanation of all these properties and to see them as just so many means at the disposal of an unknown end. Transcendental. When you look at a flower, its symmetrical arrangement provides you with such beauty, provides you with such an appeal towards beauty, that you know that this sort of a beauty cannot end with the flower itself. It must extend to the entire natural world, making it a transcendental concept, making it a metaphysical concept, a transcendental concept. But that is exactly the error. Sartre says the beauty of nature is in no way comparable to that of art. The work of art does not have an end. He stresses this. There we agree with Kant. Kant is partially right, but the reason is that it is an end. It is not because it gives you a semblance of an end and it only appeals to your imagination. It only makes you feel that you are free to interpret it, but actually it is a very concrete object in which you cannot play around. Very much like the beauty of a flower, which is transcendentally connected to the unanimous beauty that all of nature bestows upon us. Sartre says that the work of art is not like that. It does not have an end, but the reason is that it is an end. End mane kintu shesh na. Means to an end expression, it does not imply that you are working towards the end of all things, towards the end. No, it is not the end. It is an end. The Kantian formula does not account for the appeal which resounds at the basis of each painting, each statue, each book that appeals to your freedom. Kant believes that the work of art first exists as fact and that it is then seen. So the work of art exists as a fact. Well, this thing exists as a fact, as in an a priori knowledge. A priori, a truth that existed before human beings, before the consciousness came into question, before the consciousness of human beings came into question. It makes it, oftentimes deified. Nature is deified because we think that it is a priori, because it existed even before us. But in a very postmodern reading, nature is what you make of it. My room is a natural environment for me. That is also inclusive within the nature in a postmodernist thought. The nature is also factories and industries that pollute the nature with a capital N, which supposedly exists a priori. Nature is intermingled with, there is nothing called human made right anymore. Everything is a part of our nature, of our daily lives. It is an all encompassing word in a postmodernist reading, which Sartre of course propagates, which Sartre of course is one of the major founders of that postmodernist thought. So he says, Kant says, believes that the work of art first exists, in fact, like all natural beauty, and then it is seen. Whereas it exists only if one looks at it. Beautifully contradicted by Sartre. Sartre says, images in the mind niye kotha bolche. That images in the mind exist, true. It is true that they are pre-existing. I do have an image in my mind of a flower as taught to me, when I was in class 2, red ball, yellow flower, etc., etc. They are all images in my mind. But Sartre says that they are only a means to an end. They are only a means to relate to the outside world. And those images change as you grow, as you perceive a newer world every day. As your world grows, as you grow, as your consciousness develops, as your intellect develops, as your freedom develops, freedom of choice, যেটা philosophy introductory classes এ বলছিলাম, as that develops, your perception of the world also develops. So images in your mind, which Kant says is a priori, the work of art has existed before, and then you see it like natural beauty. Sartre says that a work of art will exist only when you see it, when one looks at it. And if it is first pure appeal, pure exigence to exist, pure exigence as in it exists in an emergency. As soon as you look at it, it comes into existence. মানে এখানে আর কি অনেক রকমের কন্ট্রাডিকশনস করা যায়। তাহলে তোমরা বলতে পারো যে আমরা তো ভগবান দেখিনি, তাহলে কি ভগবান নেই? It's not like that. It's not like that. Understanding of theological philosophy occupies a different branch of study altogether. যেই কারণে Kant also reached this conclusion that our belief is not oriented by what we see. Our faith is not oriented in what we see, and therefore God exists as a priori. The being of true reason, the being of true creation, of absolute first creator, that is. So he must exist. He must exist by doubt. Even if we doubt, it proves that God exists in some form or the other. But Sartre, Derrida, these people, they will all their philosophical endeavor was to dismiss this very fact of Western teleological thought, of Western deifying thought. Telos, of our significance often always leading us to telos, the fact that Christ was the Son of God, and we could see him, we could touch him. He died a violent death like so many human beings. That was an essential politics of making God real, of making faith real, unquestionable, because people have seen God, people have seen Christ. It's a huge politics involved over here, and Sartre and Derrida, they were very much opposed to this particular way of thinking, that whatever certain kind of knowledges exist a priori, so you cannot question them. So the divine rule of the king was never questioned before, because he was believed to be governed divinatively, that God ordered the king. King can be seen, he's a representative of God himself, and therefore monarchy was unrefuted form of governance for so long. But very ironically, the one country that originated this form of governance now has the queen only as a nominal head. That proves how long, how far this teleological thought has undergone certain kind of degradation, certain kind of deterioration for the good. This is a positive development. So coming back, exigence to exist. So you have to look at a work of art for it to make exist. It is not an instrument whose existence is manifest and whose end is undetermined. So the beauty does not exist in itself. You need to perceive it in order to make it exist. It presents itself as a task to be discharged. Work of object exists, but it is a task to be discharged, task carried out by the viewer, by the spectator, by the reader. From the very beginning, it places itself on the level of the categorical imperative. Again, this is a Kantian concept of categorical imperative. So categorical imperative, very simply put, is it is a supreme moral sense which binds all of us humanity, which must bind all of humanity, and it is not dependent upon your subjective inclinations. Supreme moral obedience, which can only emanate from God. And Sartre says that from the very beginning, a work of art is in the level of categorical imperative. He says, you are perfectly free to leave the book on the table, right? But if you open it, you assume responsibility for it. For freedom is not experienced by its enjoying its free subjective functioning. Freedom is not good in itself. In itself, freedom কথাটা, freedom কাজটাতে কি কাজ হয়, কি লাভ হয়? কোনো লাভই হয় না. But a creative act required by an imperative. This absolute end, this imperative, which is transcendent yet accepted, acquiesced in as in accepted, which freedom itself adopts as its own, is what we call a value. The work of art is a value because it is an appeal. Appeal কথাটা আমরা already বুঝে গেছি. So the work of art acquires value only when you pick it up, assume responsibility of it, gather your freedom of it, and exercise that freedom. That gives the work of art a value. Exercising মানে আমি বলছি না, Sartre বলবে, Sartre in various instances he will say that exercising of freedom is a form of revolution. It should manifest into a form of revolution, which he will say in the introduction of Frantz Fanon's book, The Wretched of the Earth. I will send that to you. It's a very explosive essay. You must read that. I will send a copy to you. So many places he will say, but not always, not universally. It does not mean exercising your freedom always does not mean যে তুমি বিপ্লব করো, revolution আনো, হ্যান ত্যান এরকম না. But it can be a small change inside of your own consciousness. But you have to exercise your freedom. You cannot just pick up a book, read it, and keep it down again without acquiring any knowledge from it, without acquiring any development of your consciousness from it. That is basically a dull sort of a reading. That is basically you reading as an automaton. But we are not an automaton. We are not automatic machines. We have feelings, emotions, freedom of choice. We have built up certain principles of decision, and we must act. That act can be you writing about it, talking about it according to your own interpretative methods, or undertaking another creative process, undertaking another process of creation. That is what gives the work of art value. It must change you, alter you, even if it is 0.5%, and that can happen only when you exercise that freedom. Not like Kant say that it is a finality without an end. It gives me a semblance of end, but একটা প্রচণ্ড বেশি universal আর কি meaning, significance we give to a work of art, thereby reducing it to universality. But each work of art, Sartre is also trying to say over here that universalizing all work of art, reading it according to humanitarian values, they're not always feasible. That is not what your responsibility or our responsibility can be in today's age. It cannot be so. And each work of art is different. It has heterogeneous values. They're different according to cultures, contexts, ethnicities, religions, geographical spaces, temporal spaces, historical spaces. They have all differed from one person to another. Billions and billions of people living in this world. So your exercise of freedom must also be unique. So I will keep it till here for now. Expect an extra video lesson within the week. Within this week, we will move forward with reading the essay. So thank you very much. Please, if you have any questions, any difficulty in understanding, do not keep them to yourself. You will find that, you know, relying on external articles and sources will make Sartre's reading all the more difficult. Trust me on that. So understand as much as you can from this essay itself, so that you can write mostly by yourself, and of course I will help you out with the critical analysis. Wait till then, wait till those classes. But if you have any difficulty in understanding any point, if you want me to repeat something, do come up to me. Otherwise it will be a very difficult you will find difficulty in understanding the essay in the future. So do not keep it for later time. If you have any question, just যেরকম ভাবে আমি পড়াচ্ছি, read only those pages, read only up till then. Keep your mind clear, keep your mind up to date, and the essay will be very much easier, very easier to understand and write about later for your exams. Thank you very much.